All India Radio. You will now hear comments from the press. The Times of India in its editorial titled Islamabad's Empire says, while Prime Minister Imran Khan is expected to use his turn at the UN General Assembly lectern to launch into an apoplectic tirade against India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi did well to stay out of the mud wrestling pit with Khan. Modi didn't make a single reference to Pakistan in his speech, instead making a broad appeal to fight the scourge of terror and focusing on issues such as climate change, renewable energy and poverty alleviation. It's best to let Khan speak for himself on such matters. His habitual resort to nuclear saber rattling will only showcase the vast gap between the sense of responsibility a nuclear power ought to exhibit and Pakistan's actual behavior. The duplicities in his argument are fairly obvious to the world community. One of them was indicated by Alice Wells, the US State Department's point person for the region, that Pakistan stays mum when it comes to Uyghur Muslims in China, whose fate is certainly far worse than that of Kashmiri Muslims in India. Uyghurs are disallowed from practicing their religion, and hundreds and thousands of them have been heralded into concentration camp-like conditions. A look at the state of minorities or of democracy in Pakistan itself would also be salutary. As Pakistan's dramatically opposed stances on India and China demonstrate, they stem not so much from concern about the state of Muslims or of human rights as from Pakistan's own pre-existing orientations towards those nations. Khan's hypocritical rhetoric isn't finding much traction outside his country, as he himself has sadly noted. To get out of the impasse where it finds itself lodged, Pakistan must re-examine its attitude of primal antipathy towards India. There's everything to be gained from leveraging a booming India and much to be lost from pursuing the impossible dream of strategic parity with India in all respects. The Indian Express in its editorial titled Monsoon Bounty writes, every monsoon is different, this one's been even more so. In June, the country registered an average area of weighted rainfall deficiency of 32.8%, and it seemed this season would confirm to the textbook case of an El Nino year similar to 2002, 2004, 2009, 2015 and 2016. All those years had witnessed the abnormal warming of the equatorial eastern Pacific Ocean waters known to impact rains in India during the monsoon season from June to September, with most global weather models predicting El Nino conditions which had set in from roughly September 2018 to last at least till the first half of this monsoon season. A drought looked inevitable, and coming on top of an extended dry spell right from October through an excruciatingly hot summer, the return of food inflation appeared to present the re-elected Narendra Modi government with its first major challenge. Business Line in its editorial titled Tipping Point says it was amidst unprecedented public protests the world over from Europe to Australia and New Zealand and finally India's school children that the UN Climate Summit held last week pressed world leaders to augment their Paris Accord commitments. The urgency to go beyond the Paris Accord has been driven home by the experience of the last 4 years. The hottest on record and winter temperatures in the Arctic have risen by 3 degrees Celsius since 1990, according to the UN website on the summit. But notably, with the possible exception of India, major emitters have failed to rise to the occasion. India's emissions curtailment plan, led by its push for renewables and electric vehicles, is in line with reducing world temperature rise to 2 degrees centigrade, whereas China, the US and the European Union, the top three in terms of total emissions, need to do much more to get there. There can be no denying that in view of the principles of equity and climate justice, the developed world must bear the brunt of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 45% over the next decade and to net zero emissions by 2050. They have developed the economic standards by accounting for the bulk of the global stock of carbon emissions in the atmosphere and must cough up the money and the technology which they possess for reducing emissions across the world. The Tribune in its editorial titled Semblance of Justice writes, 2 years after he was suspended and jailed following the death of infants due to alleged lack of oxygen supply at the state-run BRD Medical College in Gorakhpur, Uttar Pradesh, a government inquiry has absolved Dr. Khafil Khan of the charge of medical negligence, but he continues to remain suspended and has demanded a CBI inquiry into the case. The incident took place in CM Yogi Adityanath's backyard. About 60 infants died in 48 hours due to the shortage of oxygen over non-payment of dues to the supplier. That the supply of oxygen cylinders so essential for patients in critical condition could be cut reeked of both negligence and carelessness. The Pioneer in its editorial title, its exit plan says, with the Indian Institute of Technology IIT Council approving some major structural reforms relating to the performance of its students, it may well have saved itself the embarrassment of those dropping out midway. Of 7 measures, the most sought after decision was to ensure an honorable exit for weaker students who had to abruptly discontinue the course because they could not cope with the progressive pressure it entailed. Now they can get a BSc after 3 years even if they sign up for a 4-year BTech degree and opt out. Those were the comments from the press presented to you by the News Services Division of All India Radio.